Here are 100 dumb US laws with proof they actually exist, and each one is real enough to check. In Gainesville, Georgia, a city rule said chicken must be eaten with your hands, a quirk playfully enforced on a 91-year-old during a 2009 publicity stunt. Indiana once fined a performing chimpanzee $5 for smoking in public, a bizarre case reported by newspapers and law journals. Colonial-era South Carolina required white men going to Sunday worship to bring a loaded firearm, reflecting frontier fears of raids. Texas in the 1920s made milking someone else's cow without permission a crime punishable by fines, later swept away in a recodification. Mississippi still lists seduction by a false promise of marriage as a felony with potential prison time, though prosecutions are rare today. New Jersey forbids drivers from pumping their own gasoline, reserving fueling for attendants at full-service stations. Early 1900s labeling laws created the "Do Not Remove Mattress" tag to stop retailers from swapping fillings, and penalties apply to sellers who remove labels, not to consumers. Federal flight rules and Alaska animal cruelty law make shoving a moose from a plane illegal, despite the story sounding like folklore. A 1992 New York court ruling allows women to go topless in public on equal protection grounds, though businesses and events may impose dress codes. 19th century Indiana required able-bodied men to work up to 6 unpaid days on public roads, a common practice before modern taxes. Pocatello, Idaho declared a "smile ordinance" during a post-blizzard morale drive, cementing the town's tongue-in-cheek smile capital branding. Hawaii's family law still instructs minors to obey lawful commands of parents or guardians, without attaching a criminal penalty. Lee, Nebraska reportedly banned donut hole sales for decades, until national attention spurred repeal in the 1990s. Wisconsin once outlawed margarine manufacturing and many sales for 72 years, and the state still polices labeling and institutional use strictly. Tennessee's constitution still disqualifies duelists and their seconds from holding public office, a long-lived honor culture relic. Waterloo, Nebraska barred barbers from eating onions while on duty, and even banned shop gossip, with token fines for violations. New Jersey protects registered homing pigeons from capture or injury, with small fines or short jail stints for offenders. Early Tennessee law escalated penalties for repeat thefts, including horse theft to death by hanging, an approach later abandoned. Pennsylvania allows municipalities to stay dry, and some towns still ban retail alcohol sales into the present. Louisiana treats intentional self-harm in prisons as a separate offense that adds up to 2 years at hard labor to the underlying sentence. Boston prohibits throwing balls, stones, or snowballs on streets and bans slingshots and bows on the roadway. Hawaii bans most outdoor billboards statewide, and it can fine mobile advertising vehicles hundreds of dollars per day. U.S. park rules forbid disturbing wildlife, and Alaska separately bans feeding bears and other species by negligence. Rhode Island outlaws horse racing on public roads, with small fines or short jail time still possible. Kentucky prohibits handling snakes during religious services, a measure aimed at dangerous worship practices. Concord, Massachusetts bans sale and public drinking of still water in single-use PET bottles up to 1 liter, with escalating fines for repeat violations. Michigan repealed its antiquated ban on profanity uttered in front of women and children in 2016 after courts questioned it. Mobile, Alabama bans plastic confetti to curb litter from parades and celebrations along the Gulf Coast. North Carolina lets a marriage be annulled if one spouse was physically impotent at the time of the ceremony. Kennesaw, Georgia symbolically requires heads of household to keep a firearm and ammunition, with broad exemptions that render it largely unenforced. Pennsylvania bans fishing with explosives, electricity, or poison, making violations a misdemeanor with possible jail time. Wyoming can fine people for leaving pasture gates open, because loose livestock pose real safety and property risks. Ohio restricts arrests on Sundays, the 4th of July, during legislative sessions, and in courtrooms except for serious crimes. Michigan still lists seducing an unmarried woman as a felony if charged within a year, a cultural artifact rarely invoked. Chicago requires city contractors to disclose any historical ties to slavery, with potential contract penalties for non-disclosure. Ocean Beach on Fire Island bans public consumption of anything but plain water in clear bottles in communal areas. Iowa bans hunting or even pursuing animals from aircraft or snow vehicles, attaching fixed fines to enforce fair chase. Mississippi criminalizes adultery and fornication, carrying potential jail time even if enforcement is infrequent. Oregon tickets people who leave a car door open toward traffic longer than needed, treating it as a safety hazard with a standard fine. Mississippi punishes having a second out-of-wedlock child with jail or a fine and increases penalties for subsequent births, an archaic law still printed in codebooks. Rhode Island historically required local approval for professional sports on Sundays, with exceptions carved out for ice sports. Chico, California bans manufacturing, testing, or storing nuclear weapons and their key parts within city limits, a symbolic non-proliferation stance. Clemson, South Carolina forces adult cabarets and escort services to close on Sundays, limiting hours to Monday to Saturday nights. El Paso once required spittoons in public buildings to fight tuberculosis, yet police issued no fines for at least a decade. Montana once banned screening films that depicted crimes like train robberies, a censorship rule later repealed. Yamhill, Oregon bans fortune-telling and similar occult arts as unlicensed commercial services, fining violators. Indiana forces liquor stores to sell soft drinks only unchilled, preserving a narrow, specialty retail model. Provo, Utah makes throwing snowballs in public unlawful, echoing Aspen's similar rule that also bans slingshots and catapults. South Carolina requires dance halls to close all day Sunday, with fines escalating to short jail for repeat offenders. Youngstown, Ohio tried to ban going barefoot downtown, a rule overturned in court for violating privacy without real health basis. Tennessee criminalizes importing, possessing, or selling live skunks, with penalties akin to a minor misdemeanor. Alabama forbids appearing in public in clergy garb for the purpose of deception, aiming to prevent fraud. Nevada once banned camels and dromedaries from public roads to protect wagons and horses, then repealed the rule as the camel era ended. Indiana's health rules tell bed and breakfasts to use sheets about 251 centimeters by 206 centimeters, with around 61 centimeters extra to fold over blankets, ensuring sanitary turnover. Bartlesville, Oklahoma limits households to 2 adult dogs and 2 adult cats outdoors, with fines for going over the limit. West Virginia once fined people for wearing view-blocking hats in theaters, a 1930s courtesy rule repealed in 2010. Arkansas prescribes the official Arkansas pronunciation with silent final S and emphasis on the first and last syllables. Los Angeles County forbids charging admission for house parties in residential zones, attaching fines or short jail time for promoters. Indiana bans fishing with dynamite, guns, electricity, or bare hands unless specifically permitted, a conservation standard. Rockville, Maryland penalizes obscene language near streets with possible fines or short jail, although free speech doctrine sharply limits enforcement. Massachusetts bans selling liquid center liquor candies above 1% alcohol, targeting underage access through sweets. Missouri briefly imposed a $1 annual bachelor tax on single men aged roughly 21 to 50, scrapping it the next year. Washington, D.C. bans throwing stones or similar objects on streets, treating such acts as public safety offenses. Ogden, Utah limits residents to 1 cow unless they secure a health department permit, which must be renewed annually. Several states restrict or ban Sunday car sales, and violators can face fines, short jail, or loss of dealer licenses. Texas allows legally blind hunters to use laser-sighted firearms when accompanied by a licensed sighted companion at least 13 years old, improving accessibility. Alabama outlawed bear-baiting spectacles and profiting from bear fights, and later repealed the specific section while retaining other wildlife protections. New Jersey forbids selling handcuffs to minors, treating it as a disorderly person's offense. Collinsville, Illinois banned pants, sagging more than 7.6 centimeters below the hips, then repealed the ordinance after public criticism. New York City fines residents for shaking carpets or clothing out of windows, an anti-litter rule dating to tenement days. Alabama's sweeping Sunday blue laws once banned many leisure and commercial activities, and lawmakers repealed the residual criminal section in 2015. Glendale, California bars dogs from entering or riding elevators in public buildings except trained assistance animals. Florida made unmarried cohabitation a misdemeanor for more than a century before repealing it in 2016. Louisiana criminalizes ordering goods or services in another person's name without permission, adding potential jail time to civil liability. Hilton Head Island requires beachfront lights to be off or shielded nightly May through October to protect nesting sea turtles, with fines per day. Oregon's food code bans towel drying dishes in restaurants to prevent contamination, allowing cloth only for polishing dry items. Youngstown, Ohio forbids driving downtown with too little fuel to exit, with fines for first offenses and short jail possible for repeats. Portland, Oregon limits cruising the same street segment more than twice between 2100 and 6 o'clock in posted zones to curb congestion. Linden, Washington bans dancing in any venue that serves alcohol, a rule upheld in state court against a local restaurant challenge. Arkansas caps time in a voting booth at 10 minutes, expanding from earlier 5-minute local limits to keep lines moving. Nebraska bans marriage for people with untreated venereal disease, a dormant public health rule from another era. Utah explicitly outlawed fishing from horseback a century ago, removing the horseback reference when modernizing the statute. New Hampshire treats registering at lodging under a false name as evidence of intent to defraud, supporting prosecutions for non-payment. El Monte, California forbids bartenders and servers from accepting drinks from patrons while on shift, a rule aimed at harassment and overservice. Clemson, South Carolina imposes a curfew on dogs in heat and requires owners to keep them secured for the entire cycle to prevent disturbances. Arizona forces adult businesses to close from 1 o'clock to 12 o'clock on Sundays and from 1 o'clock to 8 o'clock on other days, with cities allowed to be stricter. Hudson, Wisconsin requires insect screens on doors and windows from May through October to keep pests out of dwellings. Arizona can jail offenders for stealing or damaging protected native plants like saguaro cacti, with penalties scaled to the plant's value. North Carolina caps nonprofit bingo sessions at 2 per week, requires 48 hours between sessions, and limits each session to 5 hours. Massachusetts bans hunting birds or mammals on Sundays and even carrying a hunting arm that day outside established ranges. Waterboro, Maine sets a maximum leash length of 2.44 meters and allows impoundment for violations, enforcing orderly dog control. Massachusetts restricts civilian shooting clubs from using human figure targets, reserving such silhouettes for police training. Kendall, New York limits camping on private property to 72 hours without a permit and allows at most 2 campsites per parcel. Clemson requires an on-duty certified lifeguard for apartment pools operating between 2300 and 7 o'clock, using staffing requirements to enforce quiet hours. Kalispell, Montana demands that billiard tables be visible from the street and forbids curtains or screens that block the view. West Virginia requires a witness when administering anesthetics, like ether or chloroform, to a woman, with small fines or short jail for violating doctors. Cambridge, Massachusetts requires permits for Sunday sports in parks and mandates police presence for permitted games, with higher fees for highway sports. South Carolina's Legacy Sunday Retail rules bar sales of televisions, musical instruments, most clothing, and many other items, with narrow exceptions. Cottage Grove, Minnesota rations lawn watering by odd-even house numbers and bans watering from noon to 1600, treating violations as misdemeanors. Norco, California bans poisonous oleanders inside city limits to protect horses, even though the penalty clause was repealed and the ban now lacks a specified punishment. Proof that all the laws really exist or once existed can be found at go.wikiusa.org/dumblaws. There you will find links to the relevant sections in the legal codes. Thank you for watching until the very end. Please subscribe and tell us in the comments which dumb law amused you the most.